They were deceived in the most unimaginable ways by the very people they trusted the most. A best friend, a soulmate, a beloved family member, each story more sinister than the one before. What compels someone to turn on those they claim to love? The truth behind these betrayals will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about humanity. On a seemingly ordinary day in August 2023, thousands of Instagram users received a bone-chilling message from a familiar face. "You will see what a live murder looks like," declared Jeremey Bailey, a well-known bodybuilder, to his followers. Little did they know that they were about to witness a horrifying act of violence that would shock a nation. In the small town of Gradišak, Bosnia and Herzegovina, what began as a disturbing live stream quickly escalated into a brutal murder and a subsequent killing spree. At the center of this tragedy are two individuals whose lives became fatally intertwined. Jeremey Bailey, a 35-year-old bodybuilder and fitness instructor, was known for his muscular physique and social media presence. However, his public image masked a troubled past, including arrests for drug smuggling and assaulting a police officer. Nizama Hećimović, his ex-wife and the mother of his young child, had been trying to escape a cycle of abuse, having reported Jeremey for domestic violence. She also refined a restraining order against him in the weeks leading up to her murder. 2 weeks before the violent incident, Jeremey's rage had erupted over a minor issue. The meal Nizama served did not meet his expectations. In a fit of anger, he brutally beat her, causing her to flee to her father's home in Srebrenik with her baby in tow. The police in Srebrenik, however, offered no refuge, citing jurisdictional limitations, leaving Nizama vulnerable and desperate. Days before the tragedy, Jeremey's behavior grew even more erratic. He oscillated between tearful apologies and violent threats, calling Nizama's family and vowing to kill them all if she did not return to him. Despite the escalating danger, the judicial system failed her once again. A clerical error and a lack of immediate action on protection orders left Nizama without the safety net she desperately needed. The night before the murder, Nizama and her aunt, Sajada, were on edge, their fear palpable. They stayed up late, watching through the windows, dreading Jeremey's arrival. The only hope of security they had was the arrival of Nizama's father the next day. On that dreadful morning, Jeremey began his day with grim determination. Before the post office had even opened, he was there, anxious to collect a judicial decision he had missed the day before. This document was crucial. It rejected a restraining order Nizama had requested against him. The denial of this protection order seemed to fuel his maddening rage. After finally getting the document, he went home, snapped a pic of it, and sent it to a friend. Then, armed with a pistol, he set off towards the house, where he believed his ex was hiding with her aunt, Sajada. Jeremey's arrival at Sajada's house was sudden and violent. His fury was described as uncontainable. He began by shooting at the front door, firing multiple rounds in a desperate attempt to gain entry. Jeremey then smashed through the glass door, his hands bloodied by the shattered glass. Inside, the aunt managed to hide Nizama and the baby in the bedroom. Once inside, Jeremey pointed a gun at Sajada's head, demanding to know where his ex was. But then he heard the cries of his daughter from upstairs. Jeremey shot at the bedroom door, trying to break it down. There, he found Nizama, desperately trying to shield her child. He grabbed the baby and dragged his ex outside. In a horrific display of violence, Jeremey beat up Sajada's son, who had tried to intervene. He shot Nadim twice in the leg, leaving him incapacitated. With the baby in his arms and Nizama by his side, Jeremey's brutality reached its peak. As Jeremey's rampage continued, the police response was frustratingly slow. It took them nearly 30 minutes to arrive from the station that was just 3 minutes away. But by then, the damage had already been done. Around 10:25 a.m., Jeremey began a live broadcast on Instagram, a chilling act witnessed by approximately 12,000 viewers. He addressed his followers, announcing that they were about to witness an execution. At 10:33, Jeremey called his ex's aunt, who was in hospital with a wounded son. When she didn't answer, he wrote her this chilling message. Why aren't you answering? You can probably hear her screaming." During this time, Nerman continued his vicious assault on the mother of his child. He also called her sick mother to listen to her daughter's screams and desperate pleas, begging for her life and that of her child. Throughout the broadcast, Nerman continued to speak to his viewers. He blamed his ex for his actions, accusing her of hiding their child from him for over a week and reporting him for domestic violence. His words, an attempt to justify his brutality as a consequence of her actions. The camera captured the shocking scenes of Nerman beating Nizama, who was already bloodied and disfigured. The cries of their baby could be heard in the background, adding to the horror. Then he seized a pistol from the table and, with cold precision, shot Nizama in the forehead. Her lifeless body fell to the floor. The camera then pans to their young child, lying on the floor beside her mother's lifeless body. Nerman chillingly urged someone to save the child before continuing his rampage. Shockingly, Nizama wouldn't be the last to die at his hand that day. Fueled by a mix of rage and desperation, he continued his spree of violence, broadcasting his actions in 2 more live videos while being pursued by the police. In these videos, he admitted to killing 2 more people, a man and his young son. The additional murders spread fear and chaos throughout Gradacac, as residents realized the extent of the danger they were in. As Nerman moved through the town, he wounded a police officer, another man, and a woman, adding to the tally of victims. His actions were marked by a chilling sense of defiance and a lack of remorse. His rampage, although savage, unfolded in less than 14 minutes. He spoke of reloading his weapon and expressed satisfaction in the terror he was causing. His behavior painted a picture of a man who had reached a point of no return. The police mobilized quickly, attempting to capture Nerman and bring an end to his deadly spree. However, he managed to evade them for some time, using social media to broadcast his movements and intentions. Nerman then fled towards Pelagicevo, continuing to elude authorities. Eventually, he hid in an abandoned farm in Layton. When the special police unit closed in on him, he realized escape was impossible. At 1:45 p.m., Nerman ended his own life with a single gunshot. The loss of life and the trauma inflicted on the survivors and witnesses left a deep scar from Gradacac. Tragically, Nizama's attempts to safeguard her family ultimately led to the horrific events that unfolded. The McLaren. The call came from inside the Bailey-Stevens home. On the line was Jeremey Bailey, his voice unnervingly calm as he uttered the words that would send shockwaves through the town. "There's been a murder-suicide." What followed was a confession so horrifically unexpected that it would leave even seasoned dispatchers stunned. As police raced to the scene, they had no idea what horror awaited them behind their front door. What could drive a man to commit such an unthinkable act against his own family? It was an ordinary day in an otherwise ordinary neighborhood, with residents going about their daily routines. But on East Gentile Street, the Bailey-Stevens household was about to become the center of a tragedy that would shock the community to its core. At 9:45 a.m., a 911 dispatcher received a chilling call. On the other end of the line was Jeremey Bailey's voice, which was calm, but his words were shocking. He told the dispatcher that there had been a murder-suicide. As the conversation unfolded, Bailey revealed that he had killed his wife, his father-in-law, and his mother-in-law, along with 3 of the family's 4 dogs. The dispatcher listened in stunned silence as he calmly estimated that he had committed these acts about 20 minutes before making the call. He went on to explain that he had firearms stored at a friend's garage because he had been thinking about doing this for a few days. But he had forgotten about a Springfield 9mm firearm that had belonged to one of the victims until that very morning. As Bailey continued to speak, confirming multiple times that the victims and dogs were dead, the dispatcher quickly alerted the Layton Police Department. As the police raced towards the Bailey-Stevens home, the tragic story of the family began to unfold. The victims were his 36-year-old wife, Anastasia Stevens, her 73-year-old father, Donald Stevens, and her 61-year-old stepmother, Becky Stevens. Her parents were visiting from out of town and had been staying with a daughter and Jeremey. Like many relationships, Anastasia and Jeremey had issues. From the outside, they seemed like an ordinary couple. But beneath the surface, tensions were brewing. In the days before May 19th, Jeremey's behavior had become increasingly suspicious. Unknown to his family, he had taken a disturbing step that would later be seen as a clear sign of premeditation. He had stored firearms at a friend's garage, later admitting that he had been contemplating this horrific act for several days. As her husband's behavior shifted, Anastasia's concerns grew. On the very morning of the tragedy, she reached out to her therapist, sending a message that revealed the depth of her worry. In her message, Anastasia explained that she had uncovered some serious suspicious activities involving her husband. She described the situation as really bad and scary, indicating that she felt it might be time for legal intervention. She also mentioned that she knew she needed to find an attorney, but could not speak freely because Jeremey was still in the house. This communication, sent just hours before the tragic events unfolded, would later serve as a sign of Anastasia's growing awareness of the danger she and her family were in. The days leading up to the killings were filled with mounting tension and hidden preparations. As her husband quietly stored away his firearms and Anastasia privately sought help, the Stevens-Bailey household continued its daily routines, unaware of the impending disaster. That morning of May 19, 2023, began with a sinister act. Jeremey left the house early to make a purchase that would soon prove devastating. He bought a box of ammunition, a seemingly innocuous transaction that would later be discovered through a receipt found in his truck. Then, at approximately 9:25 a.m., the quiet of the Bailey-Stevens home was shattered. Though the exact details of what transpired inside the house remain unclear to this day, the outcome was catastrophic. In a brutal act of violence, Jeremey allegedly took the lives of Anastasia, Donald, and Becky Stevens, along with 3 of the family's 4 dogs. The 4th dog belonged to him. The horror of the situation began to ripple outward at 9:43 a.m., when a chilling post appeared on Anastasia's Facebook page. The message, written in all capital letters, declared that Jeremey Bailey had just killed everyone, including Becky Stevens, Don Stevens, and 3 of the 4 dogs. It also provided the exact address of the home on Gentile Street in Layton. This digital cry for help, presumably posted by Jeremey, would later serve as a timestamp for the tragedy and as evidence in the investigation. 2 minutes later, at 9:45 a.m., he called the Layton Police Dispatch. He calmly reported what he described as a murder-suicide, confessing the killings he had committed approximately 20 minutes earlier. During this call, he provided details about the victims and mentioned the firearms he had previously stored at a friend's garage, revealing the premeditated nature of his actions. The events of that morning, from the early ammunition purchase to the Facebook post and the 911 call, painted a picture of a meticulously planned act of violence. Investigators would later scrutinize each step taken by him on May 19th as they attempted to understand the motivations behind this horrific crime and piece together the final moments of the Stevens family. When police arrived at the Bailey-Stevens home, they were met with an unexpected scene. Despite his earlier talk of a murder-suicide, Jeremey exited the house and surrendered without incident. The calm demeanor he displayed during this 911 call extended to his interaction with the officers, a chilling contrast to the violence that had just occurred. As investigators entered the home, the full extent of the tragedy became clear. They discovered the bodies of Anastasia, Donald, and Becky Stevens, confirming Jeremey's confession. The 3 family dogs he had mentioned were also found dead. The 4th dog he owned would later become an unexpected concern for Jeremey during his time in custody. The crime scene yielded crucial evidence. On the kitchen table, officers found a handgun, presumably the Springfield 9mm Jeremey had mentioned in his call. Alongside the weapon was an open box of handgun ammunition with missing cartridges, corroborating the morning's events. 2 cell phones were also recovered from the table, potentially holding additional evidence. The investigation extended beyond the house to Jeremey's truck parked outside. Inside the vehicle, detectives found a telling piece of evidence, a receipt for ammunition purchased earlier that morning. This discovery not only placed a time frame on his actions, but also demonstrated the premeditated nature of the crime. As investigators collected evidence, a clearer picture of the morning's events emerged. The position of the victims, the location of the murder weapon, and the scattered ammunition all told a story of a carefully planned act of violence. In the hours following his arrest, his behavior while in custody provided investigators with further insight into his state of mind. After being placed in a secure holding cell at the Layton City Police Department, Jeremey was recorded making a startling statement. He said, "I can't believe I did it." A phrase that seemed to convey a mix of shock and realization at the gravity of his actions. As the investigation progressed, Jeremey's focus took an unexpected turn. He began to inquire about the death penalty, specifically asking about the possibility of execution by firing squad. He stated that he would prefer the death penalty to life in prison, revealing a calculated consideration of the consequences he might face. Amidst the horror and legal proceedings, an unexpected concern emerged: the fate of the surviving dog. In an unusual display of concern, given the circumstances, he requested that the surviving dog not be sent to the pound. As investigators dug deeper into the events leading up to the tragedy, key pieces of information began to surface, shedding light on the circumstances that led to that fateful morning. One crucial piece of evidence was a message Anastasia had sent to her therapist on the very day of the murders. In the wake of the horrific events, the legal system swiftly moved to address the crimes committed. He was initially charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder, 3 counts of felony discharge of a firearm, and 3 counts of aggravated cruelty to animals. These charges reflected the severity of his actions against the victims and the family pets. Given the brutality of the crime and the multiple victims involved, prosecutors began to consider pursuing the death penalty. However, the legal proceedings took an unexpected turn in October 2023, when Jeremey chose to plead guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder. This plea effectively ended the possibility of a trial and moved the case directly to sentencing. The guilty plea also meant that some questions about the tragedy might remain unanswered forever. On December 13, 2023, he faced his sentencing hearing. The court handed down a severe punishment: 3 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole. The sentence ensured that Jeremey would spend the rest of his life behind bars, providing a measure of justice for the victims and closure for the community. While the exact motive behind the killings remains unclear, several factors emerged that could potentially shed light on his state of mind leading up to the deadly event. Suspicions of infidelity appear to be a significant source of tension in the relationship. A longtime friend of Anastasia's, Janessa Baldwin, said the couple had been dealing with issues of infidelity for some time. In their last conversation on May 17th, just 2 days before the tragedy, Anastasia discussed her notion that her husband had cheated on her again. This was, however, not a new concern. A Facebook post from 2018, from before their marriage, revealed Anastasia's struggles with Jeremey's alleged unfaithfulness. In the post, she said her unfaithful, lying, cheating, self-centered, sadistic, narcissistic, sociopath of a boyfriend used Facebook as a getaway to indulge his depravity. In the post, Stevens also wrote that she was not suicidal, and that if she ended up mysteriously missing, it's definitely suspicious. "I know this is ultimately my decision, and my F-up. I get it, and I hate myself too," the post states. "Trust me, don't bother wasting your breath." But yeah, I really don't know what the point of this post is. I guess just an FYI on why I'm not really online anymore. Baldwin said the two had been going to couples therapy, but Stevens had never relayed that her husband may be violent. However, the recurring nature of the infidelity problems seemed to be taking a toll on their relationship. Another friend, Jesse Edelson, suggested that Anastasia might have been considering leaving the relationship. He believed that Anastasia's father and stepmother were supporting her in this decision, which could have led to increased tension within the household. Edelson also noted that he and the neighbors had witnessed arguments between Jeremey and his father-in-law, hinting at broader familial conflicts. While these factors provide some context, they don't fully explain or justify Jeremey's actions. The true complexity of his motives may never be fully understood. Next, we shift our focus to a saga that spans coast to coast. A story so bizarre, it seems ripped from the pages of a thriller novel. Robert Durst is a name that resonates with intrigue, privilege, and scandal. The eldest son of one of New York's most powerful real estate magnates, he was born into a world of immense wealth and influence. But beneath the facade of affluence lay a life of mystery and crime. In the fall of 1971, Robert, an heir to the Durst family real estate fortune, met a bright and lively dental hygienist, Kathy McCormick. At just 19, Kathy lived in one of the many buildings owned by Robert's family. The couple married 2 years later. But behind closed doors, the relationship had deteriorated, and Kathy confided in friends about Robert's controlling and abusive behavior. Kathy considered divorce, but found herself trapped by an unfair prenuptial agreement. The document reminded her of the power imbalance that had always existed between them. As their marriage crumbled, both sought solace in affairs. But Kathy's friends and family were all relieved when she was finally on the verge of divorcing Robert. Fate, however, had a different plan, setting the stage for a mystery that would haunt the lives of everyone involved. On January 31st, 1982, Kathy attended a party at her friend's house. It was supposed to be a night away from the tensions at home. But during the party, an angry phone call from Robert shattered Kathy's brief escape. Before leaving, Kathy told her friend, "If something happens to me, check it out. I'm afraid of what Bobby will do." These chilling words would be the last anyone other than Robert would hear from her. 5 days later, on February 5th, 1982, Robert reported Kathy missing. He claimed that after a heated argument, she left their South Salem home, insisting on returning to the city. Robert said he drove her to the station in Katona, where she planned to catch a train back to Manhattan. He said he later spoke to her by phone when she arrived at their apartment. According to Robert, a doorman saw Kathy entering the building, and a call to a medical school made by someone identifying themselves as Kathy seemed to corroborate his story. Yet the picture he painted was far from clear. As winter turned to spring, Kathy's friends grew increasingly uneasy. They found her mail discarded in the trash, unopened. Convinced something was wrong, they went to the police with their concerns. Doubts began to cast shadows over Robert's account. The doorman admitted he had only seen Kathy from behind, and the details of Robert's call from a payphone did not add up. The nearest payphone was miles from his house. Despite these inconsistencies, the lack of concrete evidence kept the case classified as a missing person investigation. Kathy's disappearance remained a mystery. 8 years later, in 1990, Robert divorced Kathy in absentia, legally severing ties to his missing wife. Then, in the summer of 2000, the past had again started to close in on Robert. New York police had begun to take a renewed interest in Kathy's disappearance. They contacted Robert's longtime friend, Susan Berman, hoping she might hold clues about Kathy's fate. Berman had been Robert's confidant for years and his unofficial spokesperson during the initial investigation. Then, a tragic discovery was made on Christmas Eve. Susan was found murdered in her LA home, shot execution style in the head. There were no signs of forced entry, and her valuables were untouched, a sign that she likely knew her killer. An anonymous letter addressed to the Beverly Hills Police Department directed them to her home, stating simply, "Cadaver." Susan's murder renewed suspicions around Robert. The timing and circumstances of her death raised suspicions, particularly regarding what she might have known about Kathy's disappearance. Yet, despite the suspicions, no direct evidence could link him to the crime. In the spring of 2001, Robert decided to add another layer of intrigue to his already complicated life. He moved to Galveston, Texas, adopting the disguise of a mute woman named Dorothy Siner, a former high school classmate. He attempted to live anonymously, renting a small apartment in a boarding house. His neighbor was Morris Black, an older man who would become an unwitting participant in the next chapter of Robert's saga. On September 30th, 2001, a gruesome discovery was made. A torso was found floating in Galveston Bay, drawing intense police attention. Investigators traced the evidence back to Robert's boarding house, setting off a chain of events to unravel the carefully constructed life he had built in Texas. Days later, police searched the boarding house and discovered blood evidence linking Robert to Morris's murder. However, he was released on bail and disappeared, leaving law enforcement scrambling to track him down. As the search for Robert intensified, another chapter from his past was quietly closed. In November 2001, Kathy Durst was declared legally dead. Then, the drama took an unexpected turn when Robert was arrested in a Pennsylvania supermarket. In a bizarre twist, he was caught shoplifting a sandwich, despite having more than $500 in cash. A search of his car revealed more money, a cache of weapons, and Morris Black's driver's license. After a 2-year trial, he was acquitted of murdering Black, despite admitting that he fatally shot and dismembered Black's body. In 2010, his enigmatic life again captured the public attention with the release of All Good Things, a film inspired by his life and the mystery of his wife's disappearance. Against legal opinion, Robert reached out to the film's director, Andrew Jarecki, setting in motion a series of events that would lead to The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst, a documentary series that would ultimately play a crucial role in Robert's eventual downfall. During a recorded interview, Robert was confronted with damning evidence linking him to the murder of his close friend Susan. An envelope he had sent Susan matched the handwriting of the cadaver letter. During a private moment, unaware that his microphone was still on, Robert muttered to himself, "Kill them all, of course." This chilling admission would become a turning point in his story. In early 2014, the LAPD reopened its investigation into Susan's murder, fueled by new insights gained from the documentary. They subsequently concluded that Robert had indeed written the cadaver letter. As the documentary aired in March 2015, Robert went on the run when an arrest warrant was issued for Susan's murder. Just 4 days later, he was arrested in New Orleans. At the time of his arrest, he was found with a revolver, a latex mask, and $40,000 in cash. The revelations from the documentary prompted authorities to explore potential connections to other disappearances, including that of a college student who vanished in 1971. Robert's legal battles continued to unfold. In 2016, he pled guilty to gun charges stemming from his arrest in New Orleans, resulting in a federal prison sentence. But Robert pleaded not guilty to the charge of murdering Susan. After a lengthy court trial, Robert was convicted of Susan's murder and was sentenced to life. While Robert battled health complications, the legal system continued to close in. 40 years after her disappearance, he was charged with Kathy's murder. He died in prison from cardiac arrest 3 months later, in 2022, at the age of 78. On October 28, 2014, the Long Island town of Farmingdale was preparing for Halloween. Houses were decorated with fake cobwebs, pumpkins, and jack-o'-lanterns. But what unfolded on Secatogue Avenue was not a scene from a horror movie. It was real. Derek Ward, a 35-year-old man with a history of mental illness, including bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, was living with his mother, Patricia. Neighbors described him as a quiet, unassuming figure who was often seen helping his mom with groceries. 66-year-old Patricia was a beloved language arts professor at Farmingdale State College, with nearly 3 decades of teaching experience. She was his sole caretaker after losing another son, Robert, to a heroin overdose in 1997. Though Derek had a lengthy history of mental illness, including arrests for weapons possession and drug charges, neighbors described the mother and son's relationship as unusually close and codependent. Patricia seemed extremely protective of her troubled son, witnesses recounted, often asking if he had his wallet and keys when they were out. But Derek's psychological condition had severely deteriorated following his grandfather's death. Derek had recently been released from a psychiatric facility and was supposed to get medication refilled in a couple of days. But they would never make it to the appointment. That was just days away. Neighbors recall Derek becoming increasingly erratic as his unmedicated condition deteriorated. One evening, Patricia had simply dropped a fork, and the noise made her son fly into a rage. Her brother, Robert Lubrana, recounted. She pleaded with him to go to the ER, but he refused, according to Lubrana. It wasn't the first time Derek had lashed out over seemingly small things. Lubrana recounted an incident a few months prior when Derek became incensed that Patricia was making too much noise cooking him dinner. The mundane clatter of pots and pans set Derek off into a frenzy of anger. that took hours to defuse, Lubrano said. On another occasion mentioned by Lubrano, Derek had an outburst when Patricia's television was too loud, prompting a heated argument where he claimed the noise hurt his head. These displays of volatility over small stimuli had become more frequent and concerning for Patricia in recent months. She pleaded with him to go to the ER, but he refused. On that fateful October night, Derek's long simmering demons finally erupted in an unimaginable way. Inside the small apartment they shared, he ambushed his mother Patricia, savagely attacking her with a large kitchen knife. Neighbors were oblivious to the struggle as Derek overpowered the 66-year-old woman, stabbing her repeatedly and breaking several of her ribs. In a final act of brutality, he used the knife to decapitate Patricia, severing her head from her body. But the horror didn't end there. Covered in his mother's blood, Derek dragged her decapitated body outside and kicked her severed head 20 feet down the street, witnesses said. Neighbors watched in shock as the grisly scene unfolded before their eyes on this night meant for make-believe scares. One witness described passing by the scene in her car and doing a double take at what she thought was a dummied Halloween head lying face down in the road, with long black hair fanning out. One neighbor even tried to pick up what he thought was a dummy before realizing the sickening truth. As police began arriving on the scene, Derek had already slipped away, fleeing the carnage he had unleashed upon his own mother. Less than a half hour later, authorities received reports of a man struck by a train less than a mile from the crime scene. When officers arrived, they found Derek's mutilated body on the tracks. He had taken his own life by jumping in front of the oncoming locomotive in the wake of decapitating his mother. At the apartment, investigators uncovered a scene of unimaginable brutality. Based on the trail of blood and evidence of a prolonged struggle, it appeared Derek had chased his mother through the home, leaving behind walls and floors drenched in her blood. The knife, believed to be the murder weapon, its blade stained with Patricia's DNA, was recovered in the kitchen near her butchered remains. On a night meant for harmless tricks and treats, the town of Farmingdale was forced to confront a real-life nightmare from which it may never fully recover. In the sleepy neighborhood of Great Bedaux, Chelmsford, the McCullough family lived what seemed like a normal, quiet life. John McCullough, a retired college lecturer, and his wife Lois were well known for keeping to themselves. Their youngest daughter, Virginia, who everyone called Ginny, was an artist who had moved back home. On the surface, their house was just another home in the neighborhood, but what was happening inside was far from ordinary. It was August 2018 when John and Lois McCullough were last seen by their neighbors. The couple, both in their 70s, had been living in their 3-story home for over 20 years. Their neighbors, used to their quiet nature, didn't think much of it, and the McCulloughs gradually stopped coming around. Some chalked it up to the increasing isolation brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, which made everyone a little more distant and kept people inside their own bubbles. Neighbors had mixed feelings about Virginia. Some thought she was a bit odd and kept to herself. A neighbor remembers Ginny growing up in that house, but rarely saw her interacting with others. He mentioned that she once told him she sold drawings of horses, but her overall demeanor was always distant. Some locals said Virginia could be a bit much. She was known to be overly chatty, sometimes to the point of being a nuisance. Even though she mostly kept to herself, when she did decide to talk, she could come off as intrusive or a little too persistent. There were also reports of her leaving small gifts for neighbors, which some found strange, given how isolated she usually was. They, of course, had no idea of what was happening behind the scenes of the McCullough household. It's believed that sometime between June 17th and June 20th, 2019, something unthinkable happened in that house. Virginia McCullough poisoned her father, John, using prescription drugs, and not long after, stabbed her mother, Lois, to death. For years, Virginia kept up the appearance that everything was fine, continuing to live in the house with her parents' bodies hidden away. She lied to families, friends, and even doctors, telling them her parents were either unwell, away on vacation, or on extended trips. It wasn't until September 2023 that the horrifying truth began to unravel. While Virginia mostly led a solitary existence, a few weeks before the grim discovery, on August 18, 2023, the police were called to the McCullough house. Virginia had reported being assaulted in her back garden. A female officer showed up and spoke with Virginia in the first-floor living room, unaware of the dark secrets the house held. At that time, the officer didn't suspect anything out of the ordinary, beyond the reported assault, and no search of the house was carried out. Then, on September 13th, 2023, the police were called back to the home after the McCulloughs GP raised concerns about missed appointments. He was concerned about the elder couple's welfare, as he had not seen them in at least 4 years. That's when the police made a shocking discovery. The decomposed bodies of John and Lois hidden away in a top-floor bedroom. Virginia was arrested and soon confessed to the murders. She had been living in the house with the bodies for at least 4 years, keeping up the charade that her parents were still alive. The investigation revealed that Lois had died from stab wounds, but the exact cause of John's death is still being looked into. Forensic experts were also trying to determine if the bodies had been preserved in some way, but so far, nothing conclusive has been confirmed. In court, Virginia pleaded guilty to the murders of her parents in a hearing in July 2024. And while sentencing procedures are still expected, the judge noted that life imprisonment is the only possible sentence for such crimes, though the minimum term will still need to be decided.
I've done nothing wrong.
Joshua Stimpson uttered the calm, chilling words just days before his deadly obsession reached its tragic climax. Their relationship had begun like any other modern love story, a match on the dating app Tinder. But what followed was a nightmarish descent into manipulation and escalating fixation. Molly McLaren was a vibrant young woman with a bright future, whose life was cut short by an ex-boyfriend whose obsession turned deadly. Molly was like many young women, navigating the world of dating in the age of social media and dating apps. She was known for her bright personality, love of fitness, and a close-knit circle of family and friends. She was a diligent student, pursuing a career in personal training. Those who knew Molly described her as kind-hearted, ambitious, and full of life. Her vibrant and bubbly personality made her a beloved friend among her peers. In July 2016, eager to find a partner to share her busy life with, Molly started talking to Joshua Stimpson on Tinder. Joshua, a man with a seemingly charming exterior, quickly caught Molly's interest. Their communication started with a message from Molly on July 31st, 2016, where she suggested they pretend to have known each other longer to take the relationship to the next level. It seemed innocent enough, a young woman looking for love and connection. The pair didn't meet face-to-face until later that year in October, and they began dating shortly afterward. In November 2016, Molly and Joshua met in person for the first time, after months of online interaction. Their relationship blossomed, and soon, Molly introduced him to her family. Molly's parents welcomed him. Her mother described Joshua as normal, noting that he appeared pretty even-tempered. However, there were early signs of trouble. Early in their relationship, Joshua quit his job as a warehouse worker, claiming it was to spend more time with Molly. His possessive behavior continued to escalate. He often showed up uninvited and unannounced, a red flag that Molly, in her optimism, chose to overlook. Joshua's background revealed a more sinister side. Joshua had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which added another layer to his already troubling behavior. Friends and acquaintances described him as having a dual personality, charming and sociable on the surface, but capable of deep-seated anger and jealousy. By June 2017, Molly was ready to end things. "I just feel really pressured with you at the moment, if I'm honest," she told him in a text message shortly before they broke up. Molly ended their relationship during a birthday celebration, announcing the breakup in front of friends. Joshua's reaction was alarming. He shouted that she had finished with him, making for an embarrassing scene. Following the breakup, Joshua's behavior took a darker turn. He bombarded Molly's Facebook with cruel accusations and claims, including that she had a drug habit. He also reposted private photos and intimate messages. Despite Molly blocking him, he employed an unsuspecting friend to track her Instagram posts and location, allowing him to show up where she was. On June 20th, 2017, he purchased a knife and later a pickaxe, items that would later play a horrific role. Distressed and frightened, Molly reported the abuse to the police on June 22nd. She printed out the posts and took them to the authorities. Police called Joshua, warning that they would arrest him if his harassment continued. In the call, the officer said, "We wouldn't want Molly to come to the police station again about you, would we?" Oddly, he responded, "Wouldn't we?" In a telephone conversation, police warned Stimson about his harassment. Officers checked their files, and Stimson had no record. So police told Molly and her friends and family to block him on social media and to report any further abuse. Not long after, Molly went back, once again, to the police. Chillingly, he responded, "I've done nothing wrong, and if you think I have, there's more to come." This direct threat foreshadowed the escalating danger Molly was in. With the relationship over, Molly's ex sought every opportunity to stalk her. He even joined a gym in Rochester, where he knew Molly had applied for a receptionist job. As the days passed, Molly's fear intensified. She confided in her friends about her growing anxiety that Joshua could physically harm her. "He's literally lost the plot," she told friends. "I was worried he was going to turn up at my house. I'm actually scared of what he might do. I'm scared he might hurt me." And her fear was not unwarranted. She started noticing Joshua showing up at places where she frequented. Despite blocking him on social media, he continued to find ways to reach out to her. On June 28th, Molly went out with friends to a pub. But suddenly, Joshua appeared out of nowhere with a date in tow. The following day, Molly headed to the gym to film herself exercising, part of her training to become a personal instructor. She had no idea that Joshua wasn't far behind. Eerie surveillance footage shows him initially hesitant about entering the gym, but then he goes in and finds Molly alone in the gym. He walks straight past her and coolly just starts working out next to her without saying a word. Eventually, Molly confronts him, asking if he's following her. At 10:45 a.m., she texted her mother, expressing her fear that Stimson had shown up at the gym. She then called her mother, who advised her to come home. That was the last time she spoke to her daughter. In the final minutes of her life, Molly reached out to her friends again. At 11:02 a.m., she sent a WhatsApp message saying she felt like she was constantly looking over her shoulder. Just minutes later, at 11:08 a.m., Joshua attacked. He followed Molly to her car and yanked the driver's side door open. What followed was a frenzied and brutal assault. He stabbed Molly repeatedly with a knife he'd purchased days earlier. The attack was witnessed by multiple bystanders in the car park, including a dog walker who tried unsuccessfully to get him off Molly. Despite these efforts, the attack continued until Joshua, covered in blood, calmly handed himself over to the police, saying, "You want me." He had stabbed Molly 75 times and slit her throat in the brutal attack. Molly McLaren was pronounced dead at 11:43 a.m. The court proceedings revealed the extent of Joshua's dangerous behavior. Joshua had claimed Molly was his first girlfriend, portraying himself as lonely and inexperienced. However, at his trial, 2 ex-girlfriends testified about his obsessive tendencies. One woman testified that their relationship quickly turned toxic due to Joshua's possessiveness. His harassment escalated to threats of violence. Despite not knowing her address, he even sent a picture of her back garden and slashed her car tires, leaving a chilling message about a surprise waiting for her. The prosecution laid out the timeline of events leading to Molly's murder, emphasizing the warning signs and the escalating nature of Stimson's behavior. The defense attempted to argue that Stimson's bipolar disorder played a role, but the evidence of premeditation and the brutality of the attack left little room for doubt. It took the jury less than 4 hours to come to find Joshua guilty of murder. He was jailed for life in order to serve at least 26 years behind bars, a small measure of justice for Molly and her family. In the world of gravel cycling, Mariah "Mo" Wilson was poised as a rising star. before her life was brutally cut short at just 25 years old. What followed was a cross-border chase, an international pursuit spanning several weeks as authorities hunted down the killer, a woman driven by jealousy and rage to commit an unthinkable act of violence. Mariah Mo Wilson was just hitting her prime with a bright future in gravel cycling. The rising star athlete had developed an impressive resume competing in off-road endurance events. Her personal life was a different story. She had previously dated fellow professional cyclist Colin Strickland, though their romantic relationship lasted just a few weeks in 2021. This brief romance, however, placed Caitlin Armstrong firmly in Mo's path. Colin and Caitlin had an on-and-off relationship for several years. It was during one of their breakups that Colin and Mo dated briefly. By outward appearances, Caitlin had a stable career with a background in finance before becoming a certified yoga instructor. But Caitlin harbored deep jealousy over Colin's continued platonic relationship with Mo. She had been secretly tracking the two cyclists' communications by accessing Colin's email, Instagram, and iPad accounts that they shared. This allowed her jealousy to fester even more. According to one of Caitlin's friends, she had once even said she would kill any other woman Colin became serious with. Her threat appeared to become a disturbing reality on the night of Mo's murder. On May 11, 2022, Mo was in Austin before an upcoming cycling race. The athlete checked into a friend's home, where she planned to stay during the event. Little did she know that her promising life would be cut short by nightfall. That afternoon, Mo spent the day with Colin. The two went for a swim at the local pool and grabbed dinner together, maintaining what friends described as a platonic friendship, despite their past romantic involvement. What they didn't know was that Caitlin had been tracking their every move through the Strava app. Mo returned to her friend's house around 8:30 p.m. to rest before her big race. But just minutes after Colin dropped her off on his motorcycle, surveillance cameras in the neighborhood captured Caitlin's Jeep lurking around the residence. An hour later, the brutal reality of what had happened behind those doors came into horrifying focus. Mo's friend returned home around 9:45 p.m., making the gruesome discovery. The young athlete's body lying on the bathroom floor. She had been shot 3 times in what would prove to be a fatal attack. Police wasted no time launching an intense investigation into the murder. One of their first priorities was interviewing Colin, with whom she had spent time that day. He confided in investigators that he texted Caitlin, claiming he was running errands alone and that his phone had died when he was out with Mo. Based on his statements and the timeline of events, the investigators quickly honed in on Caitlin as their primary suspect. While Colin did not appear to be directly involved, detectives felt Caitlin's jealousy over her boyfriend's lingering ties to Mo could be a clear motive to the killing. Caitlin was arrested on an unrelated minor warrant at the couple's home later that day. She was, however, released shortly afterwards due to a clerical error involving her date of birth on the warrant. This turned out to be a costly mistake for the authorities. A search of the couple's home turned up a vital piece of evidence, a handgun matching the ballistics of the gun used in the shooting. With this smoking gun in hand, police quickly obtained an arrest warrant charging Caitlin with Mo's murder. But by this time, the yoga instructor was long gone. Caitlin had sold her SUV to a buyer in Texas. She then used her sister's passport to board flights from Texas to New York, eventually making her way to Costa Rica. Once abroad, Caitlin took drastic steps to hide her identity. She underwent a transformation, a $6,000 plastic surgery makeover that dramatically altered her appearance. She cut and dyed her long red curls to short and dark brown. She got lip fillers, a nose job, and a brow lift in the hopes of evading capture. But U.S. law enforcement tasked with tracking her down employed a clever tactic to apprehend her. They posted a fake job ad for yoga instructor, hoping she might take the bait. Caitlin did snap up the bait, leading authorities straight to her. In July 2022, things came to a head when authorities apprehended her at a hostel in Santa Teresa Beach. After 43 days on the run, Caitlin was finally taken into custody to face prosecution. But before her case even went to court, Caitlin would face another charge. Just weeks before going to trial, the yoga instructor made a run for it after a medical appointment. The brief freedom, which lasted just 10 minutes, saw a charge of felony escape added to her already long rap sheet. When the trial finally began in November 2022, prosecutors methodically presented their evidence, including surveillance footage placing her vehicle at the crime scene, just minutes after Mo arrived home on the night of the murder. Perhaps most damningly, they linked the murder weapon to the gun found at Caitlin's home, registered under her name. The state painted a clear picture. Caitlin's jealousy and obsession over Colin's previous romantic ties to Mo grew so toxic that she took the athlete's life in a possessive, cold-blooded act. After just brief deliberations, the jury agreed with this motive of jealous rage, convicting her of first-degree murder. The judge handed down a ruling of 90 years in prison, effectively a life sentence for the 34-year-old former yoga instructor turned convicted killer. Mo's family later won a $50 million wrongful death judgment against her. The lawsuit also stipulates that she may not profit in any way from Mo's death, including potential book or movie deals. On a hot summer's evening, the peace of a quiet townhouse in Washington, D.C. was shattered by a horrific crime. A young, promising lawyer was murdered in his friend's home under chilling circumstances. How did this overnight stay with friends turn into a night of unimaginable horror? Robert Wone, a 32-year-old promising lawyer known for his thoughtfulness and reliability, graduated cum laude from the University of Pennsylvania and was on a successful career path. His career was a promising path, having worked for a multinational law firm before becoming general counsel for Radio Free Asia. He was also actively involved in the Asian Pacific American Bar Association, a key legal advocacy group, and was set to be sworn in as its president. In his personal life, Robert was happily married to Catherine Ellen Yu and lived in Oakton, Virginia. Robert was kind-hearted and was known to put change into the expired parking meters for strangers. He was, by all accounts, a man who cared deeply for those around him. What brought Robert to spend the night at his friend's house that evening? After working late that evening, Robert decided to stay overnight at his college friend Joseph Price's house. Price, a lawyer, lived with his partners Victor Zaborski and Dylan Ward in a polyamorous relationship. Their townhouse on Swan Street was close to Robert's office, making it a convenient place for him to stay. Robert arrived at the house around 10:30 p.m. According to his friends, he took a shower and went to bed. The men soon retired to their respective rooms. Victor was awakened by a chime from a security device, indicating the house's doors had been opened. Moments later, he heard a scream. Rushing to Robert's room, they discovered he had been attacked. The trio found a knife from the kitchen set on Robert's chest. They moved the knife to a bedside table and lifted his shirt, revealing 3 massive stab wounds. Meanwhile, Victor frantically called 911, telling the dispatcher that an intruder had stabbed their guest while the household was asleep.
DC Emergency 911 operator 6752. Do you need police, fire, or ambulance?
Immediately. We need an ambulance.
What's wrong, ma'am?
We had someone that was in our house, evidently, and they stabbed somebody.
Okay, somebody's inside the house now?
I don't know. We heard.
Are they bleeding? You see someone bleeding?
Someone is bleeding in our house.
Okay, where's they bleeding from?
I think in the stomach.
In the stomach? Is he conscious? Calm down for me. I'm going to send some help, okay? Female or male?
It's a male. He's a friend of ours. He's spending the night with us.
Okay, and who was the person that stabbed him? Do you know? Is he conscious?
We need an ambulance.
Ma'am, listen to me.
He's not conscious.
He's not conscious at all?
No. We need someone right now.
Is he breathing? Listen to me. Calm down. I'm going to help you, okay? Is he breathing?
I'm upstairs, and he's downstairs. I don't know.
Paramedics arrived at 11:54 p.m. Victor was crying on the phone and expressed fear about going downstairs to let them in. Paramedics found Robert dressed in shorts and a t-shirt on top of a made-up bed. His wallet and watch were on the table, and a kitchen knife on another. The first responder noted that it seemed Robert had been cleaned, dressed, and placed back on the bed after being wounded. Despite the severity of the stab wounds, there was little blood on his body and almost none on his clothes. There were no signs of forced entry or a violent struggle, and nothing had been stolen. When police arrived, they noticed the three housemates were wearing white bathrobes and appeared to have recently showered. They seemed unusually calm. The three were separated and taken in for questioning for several hours. A detective later discovered that Robert's BlackBerry showed two unsent emails. One at 11:05 to his wife, saying he was about to go to bed. 2 minutes later, he emailed colleagues to confirm a lunch date. Did Robert write these emails himself, or was there something more sinister at play? However, police failed to copy the phone's hard drive before returning it to Robert's employers, who wiped it, resulting in the loss of potential evidence. How could such crucial evidence be lost, and what else could have been missed in this complex case? As the investigation continued, less than 3 months after Robert's death, the trio's townhouse was struck by another crime. This time, a burglary resulted in the theft of electronics valued in the thousands. It soon emerged that Joseph's brother, Michael, was involved. The burglary raised numerous questions about its timing and intent. Was it a coincidence, or a reminder to the police about the frequency of break-ins in the area? Or perhaps a veiled attempt to dispose of evidence? Investigators were particularly interested in Michael, especially after learning he missed a class the very night Robert was killed. Although Michael's partner insisted that they were together that night, police believe the burglary disrupted an arrest they had anticipated in the murder case. How did this subsequent crime impact the already complex investigation into Robert's death? The initial theory proposed by the housemates was that an intruder had entered the house, stabbed Robert, and left without taking anything. However, this story quickly fell apart. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing valuable was missing. The house was undisturbed, and it seemed unlikely that an intruder could have committed such a precise crime without anyone noticing. A neighbor reportedly heard a scream between 11 and 11:30 p.m. Yet the 911 call was only made at 11:43 p.m., raising red flags for police. The discovery of a bloody knife that didn't match the wounds and the missing knife from Dylan's cutlery set added to the mystery. Despite the severe wounds, there was no blood on Robert's body or the floor. A light film of blood with striation marks suggested someone had wiped his chest. But the housemates maintained their innocence. The police found an assortment of sex toys that appeared to be torture instruments, leading them to speculate whether Robert had been sexually assaulted and restrained before being murdered. This theory was bolstered by the evidence of sexual assault found on Robert's body. Further forensic tests revealed 6 needle puncture marks, suggesting he had been drugged, though no drugs were found in his system. Could it be that those closest to him held the key to solving the mystery? 2 years after his murder, the 3 men were charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to tamper with evidence. Prosecutors alleged they lied to investigators and staged the crime scene. But in 2010, despite all the evidence, the trio was found not guilty due to insufficient evidence. The judge believed the men knew who killed Robert, but was not convinced of their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The following year, his wife filed a $20 million wrongful death lawsuit against the 3. The case was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but the settlement did little to bring closure to Robert's loved ones. How could justice be so elusive in such a high-profile case? Despite the legal proceedings, many questions remain unanswered, including who killed Robert Wone. But as the case remains unsolved, there is still hope that new evidence or a confession could one day bring answers. It was a crime that shook Frostproof Florida to its core. How could a beloved elementary school teacher be so brutally murdered by her own son? 46-year-old Elvia Espinosa was the brightest of lights in her world. Colleagues and neighbors described her as always cheerful, kind, and devoted to her students and family above all else. Her oldest child, Marisol, remembered her as always full of life and their biggest supporter. But it was her youngest, 21-year-old Emmanuel, who appeared to be Elvia's pride and joy. A supposed genius and pre-med student at the University of Florida, Emmanuel had graduated at the top of his high school class. His future shone as bright as his 4.1 GPA. Little did anyone know that behind Emmanuel's achievements lay a disturbing darkness. On April 6, 2024, he made the 2-hour drive from Gainesville to his mother's home in Frostproof, claiming he was coming to attend a family event. But he had other intentions, a twisted plan taking shape on that drive to finally put an end to what he said was years of pent-up irritation towards his mother. Ring camera footage shows Emmanuel calmly approaching the door, butcher knife hidden behind his back. Elvia opened up the door while on the phone with a relative, excited to see her son. But, not saying a single word, Emmanuel started stabbing her over and over again as she desperately screamed, "Manny, Manny," but her cries could not be heard. Emmanuel had put on his AirPods, blasting the song "No Church in the Wild" to drown out her pleas. Applying lessons from his pre-med biology courses, he stabbed methodically, targeting areas he knew would cause maximum trauma and blood loss. For nearly 10 minutes, the horrific assault continued, Emmanuel's knife repeatedly plunging into his mother's body. When she fell to the floor, he continued the assault, stabbing her every time she tried to get up or her hands kept moving. He stabbed her over 70 times in total, only stopping when Elvia finally lay motionless. In a sickening confession later to police, Emmanuel admitted that in the moments after, as he washed his hands in the kitchen sink, he almost asked his dead mother for a Band-Aid when he noticed his hands were cut from gripping the knife. It was only then that the depravity of his actions seemed to hit home. He immediately called 911 and confessed to murdering his mother.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, tell me exactly what happened.
I killed someone.
Okay, I've got help on the way. Stay on the line. What? Stay on the line with me, okay? I've got help on the way for you, okay? Okay, sir. Okay, I want you, yes, sir, I want you to take everything out of your pockets, and I want you to keep your hands out of your pockets, okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, how did this happen?
I opened the door and I stabbed my mom.
Investigators were baffled by Emmanuel's lack of a clear motive. There was no history of abuse, substance issues, or mental illness in the family. Manny was not under the influence of drugs or alcohol at the time of the murder. When asked by investigators about the relationship, he rated it about an 8 out of 10, saying he really loved his mother, but that she irritated him. He revealed to detectives that he had a deep resentment towards Elvia because she got on his nerves, and claimed he had wanted to kill her for years before deciding to go through with it that day. Emmanuel was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He cooperated fully with the investigation. However, Florida state prosecutors have announced their intent to pursue the death penalty against him for the brutal murder of his mother. A horrifying scene was about to unfold in the trendy suburb of Paddington in Sydney. An unexpected phone call was made, one that would never be completed. Within minutes, 2 lives were brutally taken, and the investigation that followed would expose a tangled web of obsession, betrayal, and deadly intent. As investigators began to piece together the events of that tragic morning, they quickly turned their attention to the lives of those involved. Jesse Baird, a well-known TV host in Sydney, was central to this unfolding tragedy, beloved by many for his charm and charisma. At 26, he was on the rise, with a promising career and a vibrant social life. Jesse recently began dating Luke Davies, a 29-year-old who shared his zest for life. Their relationship was new, with the couple often seen together at social events in the city. However, not all relationships in Jesse's life were as straightforward. 28-year-old Beau Lamar Condon, a senior constable with the New South Wales Police, was no stranger to the limelight. Before donning the uniform, he had been a star chaser, regularly rubbing shoulders with celebrities as a blogger. His social media was filled with photos alongside A-listers like Taylor Swift and Lorde, capturing a glamorous life on the surface. But beneath this facade, a darker side of Beau was beginning to emerge. one that would lead to bloodshed. Bo had become infatuated with Jesse. Their connection began as a friend-with-benefits relationship. But it soon became apparent that Bo wanted more than friendship. Jesse, who had just exited a long-term relationship, made it clear that he wasn't interested in anything romantic with Bo. Despite this, Bo persisted, making his feelings known on more than one occasion. Jesse was firm in his response. He was not interested and was seeing other people. Bo, however, did not let go. The tension in Jesse's life began to escalate months before the fatal event. In August of the previous year, Jesse confided in a friend about a disturbing experience. He had been followed home by a police car and had woken up in the middle of the night to a terrifying sensation, someone standing over him while he slept. When he awoke fully, he realized his phone and wallet were missing. He chased after the intruder, but could not catch them. This unsettling encounter, although dismissed at the time, hinted at a dark presence in his life, one that would soon become all too real. Fast forward to the weekend before the incident. Jesse and Luke were enjoying a concert, unaware that these would be their final days together. Meanwhile, Bo was making his preparations. On Friday, February 16th, he checked out a police-issued firearm from a station in Sydney's south. Then he purchased a surfboard bag, the first steps in his deadly plans. On the morning of Monday, February 19th, Jesse's neighbors heard gunshots. A 000 call was made from Jesse's phone minutes later, but the call disconnected before anyone could speak. What happened inside the home was nothing short of horrific. Bo had entered the residence, allegedly using a key. Once inside, he confronted Jesse and Luke. What happened in those moments will remain known only to Bo, but the outcome was tragically clear. Using the police-issued firearm, he allegedly shot both men, ending their lives in an instant. But the crime did not stop there. He then began a cold and calculated cover-up, deleting contacts and messages from Jesse's phone and even sending texts from Luke's phone to create a false narrative. He posed as Luke, concocting a story that Luke was moving to Perth to throw off investigators. The immediate aftermath of the murders saw Bo attempting to erase any trace of His Highness' actions. 3 hours after the alleged murders, he goes back to the surf store to buy another bag. Then later that evening, he hires a white van, which was later captured on CCTV outside Jesse's home. The following morning, he returned the firearm to the police station as though nothing had happened. Then he sent off on a 2.5-hour journey to a rural property in Bungonia, New South Wales. On Wednesday morning, he makes the 125-mile journey back to the rural property once again. Afterward, he drove north to Newcastle, where he asked an acquaintance for a hose to clean the van, an action that would later raise suspicions. At the same time, the police investigation began to pick up momentum. Blood-stained possessions belonging to Jesse and Luke were discovered in a dumpster not too far from Jesse's home. Among the items found were a phone, credit cards, a wallet, and a set of keys. This led investigators to declare Jesse's Paddington home a crime scene, after finding blood inside. It was clear that something terrible had happened to the two missing men. By early Thursday morning, Bo left Newcastle and drove back to Sydney, abandoning the van in the Grace Point suburb. However, Bo's efforts to evade justice began to unravel quickly. On Friday, just 3 days after the bloodstained items were discovered, Bo walked into Bonnie Police Station and turned himself in. By that afternoon, he was officially charged with 2 counts of murder. As the weekend progressed, the investigation took a significant turn. Acting on the information pieced together from Bo's partial admissions and other gathered evidence, police discovered the bodies of Jesse Baird and Luke Davies buried in a shallow grave on the Bungonia property. As the investigation progressed, additional charges were brought against him, including offenses related to the illegal disposal of the bodies and tampering with evidence. Bo remained in custody as the case moved toward trial, with each appearance drawing significant public and media attention. Most recently, on August 13, 2024, Bo appeared for a committal hearing, where the court reviewed the evidence to determine whether the case should proceed to trial. The judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence for the case to go to trial, setting the stage for what is expected to be a closely watched legal battle. Keon Pittman was a school teacher at Chastain Middle School and basketball coach who was in a loving relationship with Avis Banks. The two were like any other couple. He taught at Chastain Middle School in Jackson, Mississippi, and she was a daycare worker. But beneath this perfect exterior, Keon was hiding a dark secret: Carla Hughes. Carla taught at the same school as Keon, and even though she knew he had a girlfriend, she carried on. The truth was that Carla was deeply infatuated with Keon. When they were with his friends and family, Carla would refer to Keon as her future husband, even though he had a fiancée. Keon also never hid the fact that he wasn't going to leave Avis to be with Carla. Even when Carla thought that she might be pregnant, he wasn't budging. Carla was so upset that she actually planned to tell Avis about the affair. She had been driving to their house when Keon stopped her by threatening to call the police. Perhaps if he had, the situation would not have escalated. Keon came home on the night of November 29th, 2006, to his fiancée. At the time, she was 5 months pregnant with their child, and they were looking forward to starting their family. Once Keon came into the garage of the house, he found that their dream of a happy life had been shattered. Avis lay dead, having been both shot and stabbed by an unknown intruder. It was a shocking scene. After all, he'd seen her just that morning, and even though she hadn't answered the phone when he tried to call her earlier, nothing seemed too out of the ordinary. Keon tried to revive his fiancée and checked the house for an intruder, but no one was there. He ran to a neighbor who called 911, and while the paramedics tried their best, she could not be saved. Later on, the mother-to-be's autopsy would show that she had endured 4 shootings from a .38 caliber gun, 3 stabbings, and a slashing. As a result of her horrific injuries and death, the baby boy she'd been carrying also passed away. With a murdered woman and a baby on their hands, the authorities rushed to investigate and made some curious discoveries. They initially suspected a robbery gone wrong, but nothing had been taken, so this was ruled out. They also found out that the door had been kicked in with shoe marks on the glass exterior. After collecting both blood samples and the shoe prints in the home, they got to work trying to narrow down a list of possible suspects. While the partner of the victim is usually considered, Keon's cell phone records and eyewitness accounts showed that he wasn't anywhere near the house when the murder took place. But if he didn't do it, perhaps someone else who was connected to the couple was responsible. Police began to look into Keon's life at Chastain Middle School, and soon uncovered a web of lies and scandal. According to his co-workers, Keon wasn't exactly faithful to Avis while she was alive. In fact, he was known to have several girlfriends on the side, including Carla Hughes, who was a fellow teacher. They questioned Carla, and she denied that she and Keon were anything other than friends and co-workers.
He's not a boyfriend, he's a friend. No doubt. There's nothing sexual with him. Nothing. No, nothing.
But after being invited for a second interview with the cops, she finally told the truth. She and Keon were indeed seeing each other, even though she knew about Avis. At the same time, she argued that this didn't make her a killer because she didn't have any firearms. But before she could breathe a sigh of relief, yet another piece of evidence came to light, this time from Keon's cousin, Patrick Nash. In fact, Patrick told the authorities that on November 26th, 2 days before the murder, Carla had asked to borrow his gun. The teacher said that she was worried about someone breaking into her home and wanted to protect herself. The gun she eventually borrowed? A .38 caliber. The same type of gun that Avis was killed with. Besides the gun, Patrick also loaned her a 3.5 to 4 inches long folding hunting knife, which is curious considering the fact that Avis was stabbed as well as shot. This revelation not only puts Carla under the spotlight, but could also be the key to nailing Avis's killer. The police now knew that Carla had possession of a gun and knife around the time that Avis was killed. But they still needed definitive proof that would tie her to the murder. When Carla borrowed the .38 caliber from Keon's cousin, there were 5 bullets in it, and Patrick mentioned that he didn't give her any spares. On December 1st, 2006, Carla returned the gun to Patrick, but it was empty of all its bullets. She also neglected to return the knife she had been given. 4 days later, she turned the gun over to the authorities, and a day after that, she was arrested and charged with being an accessory to the murder after the fact. While she was in custody, authorities got a warrant to search her house and find more evidence. What they found were a pair of her shoes to compare prints to the crime scene, a picture of Keon on a nightstand, and a handwritten poem she wrote for him. These prove that she was certainly obsessed with Keon, but did they make her a murderer? First, there were the shoes. The sole thread pattern from the shoe taken from Carla's house was compared to those at the crime scene, and they were a match. Then there was the literal smoking gun. The projectiles from the gun that Carla borrowed were compared to the projectiles retrieved from Avis's body, and again were a match. Her cell phone records were also reviewed, and it turns out that she had taken and made a call within the vicinity of Keon and Avis's house within the hour that Avis was killed, placing her near the scene of the crime. With all this evidence collected, Carla's charges were upgraded from accessory to murder after the fact to 2 counts of capital murder. Even though she had only directly killed Avis, the fact that her unborn child died because of her actions led to a second murder count in the state of Mississippi. Now that she had been charged, Carla was about to face a dramatic and heartbreaking trial. The prosecution already had ample evidence to pursue a case against Carla, but the trial still led to some shocking revelations. First, Keon's uncle, James Nash, revealed that he had asked Carla outright if the gun his nephew lent her had been used in Avis's murder. In response, she had kind of dropped her head and shrugged her shoulders, and I took that to be "I really don't know" or affirmative. The court also got to hear firsthand how much of an obsession she had with Keon. Even though this was clearly an affair turned toxic, Keon didn't fully disentangle himself from Carla. He actually went by her house on the day his fiancée was killed to drop off groceries for her. What had started out as a workplace romance had led to the death of both Avis and her unborn son, and now a jury was left to decide Carla's fate. While she did not take the stand to defend herself, several of her loved ones pleaded for mercy. Her adopted father, Carl Hughes, told the judge, "Carla has been a kind, loving person all her life.
I'm not asking you, I'm pleading with you to spare my daughter's life."
Her pastor also spoke about her character and said that she had volunteered at both the church and at the school she taught at. Her defense even turned their attention to Keon himself at one point. He was painted as a player who had affairs with several people and even suggested that he was connected to the crime. As the court heard the testimonies, Madison County Deputy District Attorney John Empfinger told them not to think about Carla's volunteering, achievements, or reputation in the community, but to simply consider what she had done. When that door opened, Avis Banks was not met by a beauty pageant winner. She was not met by a member of the Mayor's Youth Council. She was not met by a peacemaker. She was met by a stone-cold killer, he said. In the end, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty on 2 counts of capital murder. The punishment would be 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, to be served at the Mississippi Department of Corrections. It took the jury 8 hours of deliberation before they reached this verdict, and while 2 life sentences is a harsh punishment, things could have gone much worse for Carla. In the state of Mississippi, the death penalty is considered in the case of murder, and the fact that Carla had taken 2 lives was considered. Ultimately, the same jury chose to decline the death penalty and offer life imprisonment instead, even though the prosecution pushed for it. Even after this verdict, Carla and her legal team still tried to push for a different outcome. In August 2010, she requested a new trial. Her lawyers claimed that the jury had been biased towards her because she didn't take the stand to defend herself. A judge disagreed and declined to give her the new trial she asked for. Their next move was to approach the Mississippi Supreme Court, alleging 6 different issues in the first trial, including the admission of the DNA evidence from Carla's shoes. The Supreme Court, however, upheld the ruling. Carla has not tried to fight the verdict since then and is serving her life sentence. Keon's workplace romance might have started out as harmless fun, but led to him losing both his future wife and the only son they would have shared. On top of this, Carla Hughes' life was cut short by her act of obsession. What really happened to Christopher Aaron Morris? The 11-year-old's lifeless body was found in a dishwasher. There were no physical signs of abuse, yet wild claims of torture and sexual assault circulated online. With a botched investigation, missing evidence, and unexplored leads, why is this chilling case so shrouded in mystery? Christopher Aaron Morris, along with his sister Ashley, was an Army brat, a term often used to describe children of military personnel. Living at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, Chris was no stranger to the disciplined, yet turbulent life that comes with a military family. When his parents separated, Chris and Ashley found themselves navigating a new world with their father, while their mother battled severe drug addiction. Chris, a hyper but responsible child, was known for his love of Star Trek, Legos, football, and Taekwondo. He dreamt of becoming an astronaut, adorning his room with pictures of space and heroes in spacesuits. Despite the challenges at home, he was a protective brother and a loving son. On September 25th, 2000, a weather makeup day meant Chris had no school. His stepmother took her 2 daughters to Oklahoma, but his father decided Chris should stay home. It wasn't unusual for him to be home alone, as he was trusted to take care of himself. His father, working on the base, checked in on him around lunchtime, and everything seemed fine. However, when Chris's father returned home at 2 p.m., he found the house eerily quiet. In Chris's bedroom, the sight of dishwasher racks set off alarm bells. He rushed to the kitchen and discovered his son's clothes piled beside the dishwasher. Inside the machine, he found his son's lifeless body, and it was clear the dishwasher had been run through a full cycle. The authorities were called immediately, and the investigation began. Police initially theorized it might have been a tragic accident, but Ashley pointed out a crucial detail. The dishwasher had a latch that had to be manually moved to lock it, making it impossible for a boy to accidentally lock himself inside. This raised a troubling question. Who locked him in the dishwasher and turned it on? All eyes immediately turned to his father. Chris's father, known for his short temper, was an easy target for suspicion. One military police officer accused him from the start, even before any substantial evidence was collected. Yet, Ashley remained steadfast in her belief that her father was innocent. Adding to the confusion, $200 was missing from the house, but nothing else was taken. Could robbery have been the motive? As the investigation progressed, 2 additional suspects emerged. One was a dishwasher repairman scheduled to fix the dishwasher that was broken. Since the machine had been working at the time of Chris's death, the repairman had to have visited the house sometime that day. While details around this are few, Ashley says the repairman must have been cleared by police because no arrest was made. The other suspect was a teenager who was visiting the base. This teenager had apparently been talking about Chris and knew details about the case that hadn't been released to the public. Oddly, he was sent to Florida a few days after the boy's death, and police did not follow up on this lead. 3 different agencies, the FBI, military police, and local authorities became involved, leading to a chaotic investigation. Evidence was mishandled, and a palm print found outside the dishwasher couldn't be matched to anyone at the house. The case was further complicated by infighting among the agencies on who would take the lead in the investigation, resulting in contaminated evidence and lost leads. A few weeks prior to his death, Chris had stood up to bullies at school who were mocking a child with learning disabilities. This altercation was out of character for Chris, who generally avoided fights. Could this incident have made him a target? Despite the turmoil at home, the youngster was a bright and enthusiastic child, whose life was cut short in a manner that defies comprehension. The official ruling on his death was undetermined, neither homicide nor accident. This only deepened the mystery. There was also a known serial killer in Texas around the same time, targeting young boys. However, he was arrested 2 months before Chris's death, leaving investigators to question any potential connections. But there's another layer to this story that makes it even more haunting. Why is there so little information available about Christopher's case? Why are there so few hits when you search his name online? This isn't just a case of a young boy's tragic death. It's also a story of silence and forgotten evidence. Could it be that the conflicts between the investigating agencies led to deliberate suppression of the information? Or was it simply a case that fell through the cracks, overshadowed by other events and forgotten by the media? Furthermore, claims of sexual abuse and torture surrounding his death surfaced online, largely due to posts made by a cousin on a forum discussing the case. Despite no evidence supporting these allegations in the police reports, the cousin's sensational claims gained major attention. His sister believes these accusations were made for notoriety or attention, as they were entirely unfounded and deeply distressing for the family. But what truly happened to Christopher? Was it a prank gone horribly wrong, a botched robbery, or something more sinister? And why has this case faded into obscurity, leaving his family without closure? The truth remains locked away, much like Chris was in that dishwasher. Daniel Halseth was by all accounts a man dedicated to his children. He broadcast his life to the world on social media. He was a father of 3, with his youngest, Sierra, being the apple of his eye. He would often share glimpses of his life, filled with music, photography, and selfies with Sierra. Sierra was a former beauty pageant contestant, and had once been a bright, happy child. But in recent years, her relationship with her father had become strained. There were hints of conflict, as Daniel struggled to maintain a connection with her amid the complexities of their family dynamics. Daniel and Sierra's mother, Elizabeth Helgelian, had been locked in a bitter custody for years. In October 2011, shortly before the couple divorced, Daniel was arrested on suspicion of open and gross lewdness, after allegedly trying to force his wife into sexual activity. He pleaded guilty to misdemeanor counts of coercion and battery, and was sentenced to 6 months probation. A month later, he filed for divorce, claiming Elizabeth was unfaithful. After their divorce in 2011, Elizabeth was granted primary custody of their 3 children, but the arrangement was frequently contested by Daniel. In May 2020, Daniel had asked to see Sierra for a couple of weeks, but that stay soon became a permanent arrangement. Elizabeth was concerned about her daughter's well-being after her siblings made a police statement alleging Daniel had tried to coerce them into drinking alcohol during their visits with them. During the custody hearing, Daniel had been told to return Sierra to her mother's house, but Sierra ran away and went back to Daniel's house. A judge handling the court battle already noticed signs of potential problems months before the teen would commit a deadly act.
I am concerned with regard to what has happened, with regard to the lack of contact between the child and the mother, and certainly I don't know who's to blame at this point in time. But I saw a lot of things with regard to Sierra that causes me some concerns. Her inconsistency in the stories, depending on who she's talking to and when, comparing her interview with the Family Mediation Center with her interview with Child Protective Services, it indicates to me that something else is going on with Sierra. I don't know yet what that is, whether that's parental alienation, whether that's human trafficking, whether that's manipulation, and I don't know who at this point is to blame for that.
This ongoing battle created a tense environment for Sierra, who along with her 2 other siblings was caught in the middle of her parents' disputes. It was during this time that Sierra met 18-year-old high school graduate Aaron Guerrero, who she met online. Their relationship began in June 2020, and it quickly became intense. The teens were deeply infatuated with each other, to the point where they began making plans to run away together. When their parents discovered this, they forbade the couple from seeing each other. But the 2 continued their relationship in secret, setting the stage for the tragedy that would soon follow. In the early hours of April 8, 2021, Aaron ran away from his home and joined Sierra at Daniel's house. What happened next was a brutal and premeditated act of violence. Later that day, Sierra and Aaron withdrew hundreds of dollars from a bank account Daniel shared with one of his other ex-wives and went on what seemed like a mundane shopping trip. CCTV footage captured the couple purchasing a circular saw blades, bleach, lighter fluid, disposable gloves, and a drop of cloth from several stores near Daniel's home. They appeared calm and collected, as if they were simply running errands. But the items they purchased would soon be used in a crime that would horrify even the most seasoned investigators. Back at the house, the 2 ambushed and attacked Daniel with sharp force, causing fatal injuries. They then attempted to dismember his body using the circular saw, but ultimately gave up, setting fire to his remains in a bid to destroy the evidence of their crime. An autopsy report would later reveal that 42 of the 70 stab and cutting wounds were to the back of the body, indicating that 2 attacked Daniel from behind. The 2 fled the scene in Daniel's car. Meanwhile, Daniel's mother was having a hard time tracking him down. She called Sierra, who claimed that her father's phone was broken and that he was unavailable. When she threatened to call the police, Sierra hung up. At this point, Daniel's mother contacted Daniel's landlord, asking to check on him. Peggy arrived at Daniel's house later that day, accompanied by a friend. As they entered the home, they were met with the smell of smoke and a scene of devastation. They found Daniel's charred remains lying near the garage door. The discovery of Daniel's body triggered a full-scale investigation. Law enforcement quickly pieced together the timeline of events, aided by the CCTV footage of Sierra and Aaron's shopping trip, and their use of Daniel's stolen credit cards as they fled. A multi-state manhunt was launched to track down the teenage suspects. On April 11, 2021, Sierra and Aaron were apprehended in Salt Lake City, Utah. They'd been on the run for 2 days. Legal proceedings against Sierra and Aaron began swiftly. Both were charged with murder, and the evidence against them was damning. Police uncovered disturbing video footage from a phone belonging to the young couple.
Welcome back to our YouTube channel. Day 3 after murdering somebody.
Wow! Don't put that on the camera.
It was worth it.
And we had sex a lot today.
It was worth it. I got plenty of sex. So I was payment for doing it.
And no bleeding this time. We got through that. We overcame.
Furthermore, forensic analysis confirmed Sierra's DNA on one of the bloody knives found at the scene, while Aaron's genetic evidence was found on the other. In a desperate bid to explain the inexplicable, at sentencing, Sierra shockingly raised allegations that her father, Daniel, had sexually abused her in the past. In her letter to the court, Sierra detailed incidents she suffered at the hands of her father that has left her deeply traumatized. But while Daniel's family denied any of the allegations, Sierra's mother, Elizabeth, acknowledged her daughter's allegations. "I will always love my daughter. It horrifies me that our system didn't take the abuse she was receiving seriously before it came to this. My daughter was abused by her father. That is a fact. That doesn't excuse all of her actions. At the time, she was a minor and has taken responsibility like an adult. She's now facing the consequences like an adult." In October 2022, both were sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 22 years and ordered to pay $5,000 in restitution. Both will only be eligible for parole in 2044. Every outcast teen dreams of becoming popular. For one girl, finally feeling accepted triggered an unthinkable path of violence. On a summer night in 2003, a horrific massacre rocked a Houston suburb. When the truth about who pulled the trigger finally surfaced, it left the close-knit Houston suburb in disbelief. 17-year-old Christine Paolia was no stranger to hardship. Tragedy struck early when her father died, leaving her and her mother, Lori Paolia, to navigate life on their own. Lori's struggles with drug addiction created an unstable home environment. But Christine's challenges were made even worse by alopecia, a condition that caused her to lose her hair. The young girl's baldness made her a target for relentless bullying, leading to a very lonely childhood, leaving her with deep-seated insecurity. In 2003, Christine's life took a significant turn when she befriended two of the most popular girls at Clear Lake High School, Rachel Colorutis and Tiffany Rowell, aged 18. The two were known for their kindness and generosity. They saw beyond her appearance and took her under their wing, helping her to transform her image. With their guidance, Christine gained confidence and felt a sense of belonging for the first time. This newfound confidence led to Christine being voted Miss Irresistible by her classmates, a significant confidence booster for someone who had once felt so invisible. However, Christine's new relationship with 21-year-old Christopher Lee Snyder soon overshadows their positive influence. Snyder had a troubled past and a history of criminal behavior. When Christine began dating him, she was introduced to drugs, and the relationship quickly turned toxic. As her addiction worsened, she alienated her friends, who had once been her greatest support. By the summer of 2003, the couple's lives took a dark turn when they set off on a path of crime to fuel their addictions. In October 2003, both were charged with theft. Christine got 6 months probation, while Snyder received a 10-year sentence. Then, in July 2004, Christine was fined $4,000 and given a year of probation for a vehicle burglary. Desperate for money to fund their addiction, they hatched a plan to rob Tiffany, who they knew had cash and drugs in her home. But the plan quickly escalated. Fearing that Tiffany and the others in the house could identify them, the couple decided that the only way to protect themselves would be to kill everyone inside. On July 18, 2008, Christine and Christopher went to Tiffany's home to buy drugs from her boyfriend, Marcus Procea. Marcus's cousin, Adelbert Sanchez, and Rachel were also present. Snyder and Christine entered the home, armed and ready to carry out their horrific crime. Snyder opened fire almost immediately, hitting Marcus first. As the others scrambled to escape, the couple shot Adelbert next, while Rachel and Tiffany were shot multiple times as they tried to run. Rachel, though grievously wounded, managed to crawl across the floor, trying to reach a phone to call for help. The attackers showed no mercy. When Christine saw her friend still moving, she picked up the gun and shot Rachel in the head, killing her instantly. After firing more than 40 bullets, the couple took what they wanted and fled the scene. Less than an hour after the murders, Snyder drove Christine to Walgreens to start her shift at the makeup counter, as if nothing had happened. In the days following the murders, investigators faced a challenging crime scene. The brutality of the killings was clear, but the evidence left behind was almost non-existent. Early theories from investigators included the possibility of a gang-related shooting or a drug deal gone wrong, given the violent nature of the crime and the fact that drugs were present in the home. But with no immediate suspects or clear motive, the case began to stall. Christine's behavior after the murders, however, attracted some attention. Those who knew her noticed a shift in her demeanor. She became increasingly paranoid and erratic. There were also reports of Christine and Snyder suddenly spending large sums of money despite always being broke. But the case took another 3 years to make significant progress. In July 2006, a tip was received through a Crime Stoppers TV show that provided investigators with a break they had been waiting for. The tipster identified Christine and Christopher as the perpetrators, pointing out their involvement in the drug scene and their connection to the victims. This crucial information breathed a new life into the investigation. Investigators began to re-examine the evidence and gather additional witness statements. One key witness came forward to describe how Christine had confided in them shortly after the murders, expressing fear that she might be implicated. Another witness recounted seeing the couple together on the day of the murders, acting suspiciously. Combined with a tip, these statements helped build the case against the two. As investigators closed in on the couple, they uncovered more details about their lives in the years following the murders. Christine had married and lived in Texas under a pseudonym. She'd continued to struggle with drug addiction and was living in squalor when police finally tracked her down. She was arrested at a hotel in San Antonio on July 19, 2006, almost 3 years to the day after the murders were committed. Meanwhile, Snyder fled to South Carolina as the police were closing in on him. But before they could apprehend him, he took his own life, leaving Christine to face the legal consequences alone. The most damning evidence against her would come from her husband, Justin Rott. He told police that his wife admitted to him that she killed Rachel, graphically describing how she shot and wounded her before killing her execution style. His first-hand account of Christine's confession proved she was an active shooter, and not just an unwilling participant, despite her attempts to blame everything on Snyder. In 2008, justice was finally served when Christine was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In Australia, an unthinkable betrayal comes from the victim's inner circle. Renee Marsden was just 20 years old, but she dreamed of the perfect wedding and building a family of her own. In the weeks before her death, she spent hours scrolling through bridal websites, envisioning her special day. Despite her small stature, she had a huge personality that easily filled a room with her loud, infectious laughter. On the evening of August 5th, 2013, Renee headed out to have a dinner with friends. But she never came home that night. It was the last time her loved ones would ever see her alive. Renee's mother alerted the police after receiving a heartbreaking text.
She said to me that she loved me and she was sorry for what she was about to do. And I needed to look after the rest of the kids in the family.
Later that evening, her abandoned car was discovered at the Gap in Sydney. An eerie final message was written on the window. Police determined she had taken her own life there. However, her parents, Mark and Teresa Marsden, sensed something more sinister from the very start. Refusing to accept the cause of death ruling, her parents launched their own investigation into her disappearance and final days. What they would uncover was an elaborate work of fiction, which they believe ultimately led to their daughter's death. In the months before she went missing, Renee's family and friends had watched her fall for a young man named Braden Spidery. Renee's old school friend Camilla Zaydan had introduced the two over text in November 2011. But the only problem was that it was a long-distance relationship, and Renee and Braden had yet to meet in person. After hitting it off over text messages, Renee was really excited to finally meet her new romantic interest. But in early 2012, she received devastating news. Braden had been in a horrific motorcycle accident that killed his friend and was now in Goulburn prison, facing manslaughter charges related to the incident. This came as a heavy blow to Renee, but she had already fallen hard for Braden while he was serving his time. In fact, she was so smitten that she had his name tattooed on her chest just 3 months after they started chatting. Searching for answers after their daughter's disappearance, the Marsdens reached out to her friend Camilla, who had introduced the two. They had been unable to contact Braden and asked for her help. Camilla, however, avoided the questioning, saying she had spoken to him and that he was also hurting because everyone was blaming him. But when they told her they gave Braden's phone number to the police, Camilla became frantic, demanding they get the number back. That's when alarm bells started going off in her parents' heads. Yet, without evidence of a crime, an investigation would not continue. Taking matters into their own hands, the Marsdens started piecing together the last months of Renee's life. Phone records showed over 11,400 texts exchanged between her and Braden over a 3-month period, leading up to her death. It was the first sign that her relationship with this man was far more intense than they knew.
When we got the phone back off the police, that we actually got the messages downloaded ourselves and went through them all, and we found a whole lot of
there was phone
dialogue.
numbers, so I started ringing phone numbers, got onto a wedding photographer.
Wow.
Found that Renee had made applications to the consulate to see if Braden had been in prison, was allowed to travel overseas for the honeymoon. So the wedding was well advanced. We didn't know anything about it.
Then came a more shocking discovery. Goulburn Prison had no record of an inmate named Braden Spiteri. As the digital evidence was unpacked, an astonishing reality emerged. No records or traces of Braden existed anywhere. He appeared to be an entirely made-up persona to catfish Renee. But who was behind this fabricated identity? After analyzing Renee's call logs, the Marsdens uncovered a horrific pattern. A lot of Braden's text messages had come from the same phone tower as messages received from Camilla. That's when the sickening truth set in. Braden Spiteri and Camilla were the same person. As the horrific details poured out, a pathological portrait began taking shape. Finally confronted, Camilla had no choice but to come clean. It was she who had elaborately catfished her friend for nearly 2 years as Braden, through texts and a Facebook profile to forge an intense psychological bond. However, even with evidence seized and a confession, no criminal charges were filed, as catfishing is not illegal in Australia.
Well, personally, I think it beggars belief. There were 30,000 text messages, and when you troll through all those messages, which Teresa and I have done, the extent of the whole thing was mind-boggling. Renee was manipulated, she was deceived, she was lied to, she was controlled, it was coercive. Moral, ethically, it doesn't matter. It should be illegal in our opinion.
The closest thing to trial the Marsdens could get was a coronial inquest. But in return for her testimony, Camilla would receive immunity from all prosecution. 7 years after Renee's death, Camilla would finally have to answer as to why she had so viciously tricked her friend. But no one was ready for her answer.
Camilla Zaydan admitted to the coroner Braden had never existed, claiming she and Renee had made him up together. We were never going to be accepted. She wasn't allowed to be around me. We made the character. That way she was allowed to see me. The 27-year-old told the inquest.
Her statement infuriated Renee's emotional mother.
Renee's there. I trusted you. You came into my home. My home, I trusted you. You could have told me any time.
As messages spanning years were read out in court, they painted a vastly different picture. The evidence revealed a pattern of obsessive and controlling behavior exhibited by Camilla. In emails from 2008, when the two women were reportedly dating in high school, Camilla wrote to Renee saying she would own her and that there would be no way to escape, because only Camilla truly loved her. Even more chillingly, evidence suggested Renee's friendship with the manipulative Camilla may have even contributed to a previous suicide attempt in 2012.
Renee confided in one of my nieces that Camilla had pinned her up against the wall and made sexual advances towards her. I think from the onset, Renee was frightened of Camilla. Camilla's much bigger than Renee. And Renee didn't know how to handle that.
Fed up with her so-called friend's obsessive behavior, Renee ended their friendship while Camilla was away on a month-long holiday.
She said to me, the last straw was they were driving down the road and Camilla tried to take the steering wheel out of her hands while she was driving. Camilla wanted to kill her. Pulling of the hair, punching at the head, that was it. It was done. She said, I'm done. She said she went psycho one too many times.
The Marsdens believe this rejection prompted Camilla to seek revenge. According to evidence reviewed at the inquest, Renee's devastating last day began with an explosive argument between her and Braden. She was expecting news about his court case and hoped he would be released. Instead, Braden ended their relationship, leaving Renee devastated. Shortly after, Renee placed a call to Goulburn Prison. The call was just 90 seconds long, and it's unclear whether she found out the inmates, Braden Spitery, did not exist. Renee's mother also received messages from Braden that day, claiming that her daughter was threatening to harm herself.
So she received a text message that afternoon and that the relationship was over. She said everything's fine and there's nothing to worry about.
Then you got a text message from Braden.
So I received a text message from Braden not long after Renee got home saying I needed to sort my daughter out. She was threatening to kill herself.
While Teresa asked Renee about the messages, Renee assured her that she was fine, cryptically saying, "You don't have to worry about it anymore. I found out what he's all about." Renee left the house to meet up with friends. Instead, she undertook a 50-minute drive to the Gap, exchanging several text messages with Braden until he stopped replying. Renee then sent farewell texts to Camilla, her mother, and finally Braden. She threw her phone into the ocean and stepped off the cliff. Tragically, her body was never found. Camilla has never revealed the details of what was said in those 91 final text messages. Information that possibly could have led to the evidence police so sorely needed to prosecute her criminally for Renee's death. This story could have ended very differently. What does it take to commit the perfect crime? Even after years and years of planning, meticulously studying case reports from past criminal masterminds, and with the best forensic evidence evading tactics on the face of the earth, there's still a pretty good chance of getting caught. However, with the case of Kay Mortensen, the real perpetrators could have gone their entire lives without ever facing prosecution for their gruesome crimes. Were they criminal masterminds, or were they just lucky? Today, we're talking about the near-perfect crime that was nothing more than a stroke of pure luck. Everyone in the city of Ephraim, Utah, knew Kay Mortensen. If they didn't know him by name, they either knew him as this sweet-looking retired university professor or the 70-year-old man obsessed with firearms. He'd been enjoying his retirement with his wife, Darla, by spending time visiting his 3 kids and grandchildren. Locals described him as a survivalist. According to friends and family, he was convinced that the apocalypse was coming. If not that, then an uprising was in the works. Or someone would come for him and his family one day. In any case, Kay wanted to be prepared. He'd transformed his home into a fortress of firearms of all sizes, spread across the basement, the bedroom, and the attic. Darla apparently disapproved, but went along with it anyway since Kay was an otherwise responsible man who knew when to use them, and how to store them away. It's important to note here that the 70-year-old didn't just have a massive collection. He had an impressive one too. With firearms dating back centuries, top-of-the-line weapons, and guns that could go up to thousands of dollars, they were Kay's prized possessions. The only thing he loved most in the world was his son, Roger, who was probably his best friend. The two would spend just about every other evening together. Roger had a heart condition and was on disability, and Kay had recently retired. This meant that the two of them had more time to sit back and enjoy time with each other. On November 16, 2009, Roger and his wife, Pam Mortensen, went to Kay's residence to spend time with him after Darla had left for Salt Lake City for the birth of her grandchild. This would likely be the only part of Roger and Pam's testimony that police and a grand jury, hearing the case months later, believed. What happened next is flimsy. According to the couple, an unknown man opened the door and welcomed them in. When Roger asked about Kay's whereabouts, the man promptly shut the door behind them and told them they were at the wrong place at the wrong time. That's when another man approached the pair with a gun. One of the two assailants then zip-tied the couple in the living room while the other went upstairs. The second man then followed him. Meanwhile, Roger started crying and praying for God to spare their lives. When the men returned, Roger stopped praying, and the intruders told him to carry on. Then they told the couples that their lives would be spared if they didn't tell the police exactly what the attackers wanted them to, and they had their driver's licenses to make it happen. Pam and Roger were ordered to call 911 after the intruders left and tell the police that 3 black men had invaded their home and tied them up. The 2 men there were, as Pam would later describe them, clear-cut white men. The couple nodded their heads, and one of the assailants left a knife a little away from Roger before they left.
She either knocked on the door or rang the doorbell. I believe she knocked on the door.
I had this door opened because I knocked on the wooden door. I didn't ring the doorbell. And I said, "Is Kay here?" They proceeded to say he is and said he was upstairs, and they let us in.
The other guy shut the door. I turned around and looked. Somebody was walking down the stairs with a gun in their hand. He pointed at us and said, "You're here at the wrong time. Put out your hands." I took the knife and I cut my wire tie and I cut my wife's wire tie. I said, "Stay here, I'll see if their car is gone." And I got up and I walked up these steps. I looked out the window to where the vehicle was parked and it was now gone. I came back downstairs and my wife was talking at the time to 911 dispatch. And I said, "He is dead."
Roger claimed that he dragged himself to get the knife, freed himself, and then his wife. He instructed her to call 911 while he went upstairs to check on Kay. The call was later made public, and you can hear the woman take a moment to think when the dispatcher asks her to describe the men. You also hear Roger come in later and tell the dispatcher that they were white.
What's the emergency? He came upstairs with my father and was held hostage. Who held you hostage? We don't know. Okay, the guy that had the gun, what did he look like? Was he white guy, black guy, Hispanic? I don't know. How many were there? How many guys were there? There could have been. Were they white, black, Hispanic?
2 white.
3 white males. Okay, but how?
2 white males.
2 white males?
Upstairs, Roger found Kay's lifeless body hunched over the bathtub with his throat slit. Kay Mortensen had just been killed. But who done it? Police rushed to the scene and immediately started looking into Pam and Roger as possible suspects. Why? According to recovered body cam footage, the home was very well organized for what the couple were alleging as a home invasion. Also, Kay had no marks on his body, indicating a struggle. The evidence pointed toward the fact that the victim probably knew his assailants. The police questioned Pam and Roger, who offered conflicting accounts. Pam claimed neither man wore gloves and that they threatened to kill them, while Roger contended one wore gloves and denied any threats were made.
My name's Eric Knudsen, by the way.
I'm Pam.
He's a cantankerous old fart and set his mouth to everybody. And they had blue fuzzy gloves. They looked like women's winter driving gloves or something. The fuzzy kind.
I know they had purple gloves on. Purple, gear.
Quite frankly, I think the story's a bunch of crap. I think the story's a bunch of crap that you and Roger have come up with. Okay?
So you don't believe?
I'm trying to.
Does it sound too rehearsed? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is your husband capable of killing somebody?
I need to get a drink.
I wouldn't hope. I wouldn't think he is. I wouldn't think that he's capable of killing his father.
Investigations continued till August 4th, 2010, when the Utah police decided that they had more than enough evidence to convict Pam and Roger for Kay's murder. Besides a flimsy recount of the event and the evidence that disproved a home invasion, investigators also uncovered that Roger was the sole beneficiary of Kay's estate. He had the most to gain from his father's death.
Sole beneficiary, but I get a big share of my dad's millions too.
I know we're in a lot of debt, but I personally would not have my father-in-law killed for his money.
Why did it take till August to convict them? For one, Kay's home had actually been robbed. Several guns from his basement were missing. Initially, the Utah County Sheriff claimed that the key to the whole case was finding the weapons. However, according to Pam and Roger, the sheriff was under increasing pressure to solve the case and abandoned that theory for an early conviction. The couple seemed like the perfect couple to convict for Kay's murder, and a jury thought so too. After discovering that Roger shared the fascination for guns, they determined that Kay's son and daughter-in-law should stand trial for his murder. The pair were held in custody while awaiting trial. However, 4 months into serving jail time, a significant breakthrough was made in Kay Mortenson's murder.
Walking it out, why did it happen? And then I just watched the news, and these people are gonna go to jail, prison, probably life sentence. They pulled out their guns and told him to put zip ties on. He said that he wasn't willing at first, but eventually he said that they took him to the bathroom and bent him over the tub. He said that right after that they heard the doorbell ring, and it was too.
In December 2010, Rachel Bond reported to the Utah County Sheriff's Office that her ex-husband, Martin Bond, confessed to participating in Kay's murder alongside Ben Reddig. They intended to steal Kay's valuable gun collection for quick cash. Martin, who had long-standing familiarity with Kay, did not plan to kill him, but was implicated when the situation escalated. Rachel recounted that during the theft, Kay attempted to defend himself, leading to a struggle. This altercation happened just as Pam and Roger arrived. Martin admitted to restraining the couple, while Ben fatally attacked Kay upstairs, allegedly to eliminate a potential witness. Rachel's account painted a tragic picture of betrayal and unintended consequences.
They tentatively said hello, and they just kind of walked in, and at that point I said, "This is wrong place, wrong time." And they were obviously pretty shocked at that point. Roger cried a lot, and Pam was a little more calm. She basically was just very agreeable, saying, "We'll say anything you want us to say." That kind of thing. Too much had been done already. I didn't want anything more to happen.
Police quickly apprehended the two, and that's when Ben made a confession of his own. He claimed he was the one who tied Pam and Roger, and Martin killed Kay. Investigators also recovered about 14 of the stolen guns from a site where the two had buried them, with their registration numbers scratched off. They also found Roger's driver's license in Ben's possession. After spending 4 months in prison for a crime they hadn't committed, Pam and Roger came after the prosecutors and officers who discredited them and ruined their reputation. The couple claimed that they were still receiving threats from locals who believed they were guilty.
And that we aren't the people that we were made out to be.
They were at a loss as to what to do, and it was easier for them to blame us than to actually spend the time to look at who could be guilty.
The pair tried to sue the prosecution and officers who had testified against them for attorney's fees and pain and suffering. Unfortunately, they ended up with nothing. A judge dismissed the case on the grounds that witness testimonies, in this case the officers, could not be used against them in another trial. Regarding the prosecution, a judge determined that they were only doing their job. A job done too well in this case. Pam and Roger continued to plead their case, claiming that not only did they lose Kay that night, but also a huge part of their lives. In 2011, a jury found that Martin was the mastermind behind the crime and sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. Ben, on the other hand, received a 25 to life prison sentence. Kay Mortensen's killers could have gone scotch-free because Pam and Roger were portrayed as the perfect killers. However, Martin Bond's confession and his ex-wife's guilty conscience eventually caught up to him and Ben Reddick. Before you go, I'd love to know if you like having multiple stories in one video. Let me know in the comments down below. And if there are any cases you'd like for me to cover, you can email them to me using the address on my channel. Thank you.